My guests today are friends and co-authors of a new resource making its way into classrooms across the country. The book is called The Honor Drum, and it's meant to encourage discussion about Canada's Indigenous people and their rich history among teachers and students. Written by Tim Huff, a full-time frontline social justice advocate and developer of Youth Unlimited's Compassion Series program, and Cheryl Bear, an award-winning singer, songwriter, and storyteller, and respected voice on behalf of Canada's Indigenous peoples. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
I absolutely love this book. As a parent, I think it's much needed. I think this discussion is much needed. I grew up in the Canadian education system, and we didn't learn very much about Canada's First Peoples, Indigenous peoples. First of all, tell me why do this?
Cheryl and I have been friends for a long time, and for Cheryl, much of her life is in some portion she's shared in the book, and I just came to her as a friend and said, you know, how do we come together in a project where it's a shared conversation? Some of that comes out of the truth and reconciliation conversation for me. How do I participate in that? And there was no one that I knew that was wiser or dearer in this content for me personally than to approach Cheryl and say, could we work as friends on this?
So wise Cheryl, what did you think as you delved into this project with Tim and being able to, as we talked about, be able to help parents and teachers have this very crucial conversation, especially with our next generation?
Yeah, it's just important for me. I love it when I'm teaching and you see people light up and they understand something and they get it. And I taught all ages, mostly adults, but I think starting with children, that's part of Tim's heart, and I think it's such a brilliant idea. And I think that curriculum is, Indigenous curriculum is moving into the school systems across Canada slowly. I think Toronto's doing a really great job. Different parts of the country, BC as well, is doing really well, but to have a tool where people can just see the beauty, and we wanted to sort of highlight all of the good things that are in Indigenous culture, because those things are not often talked about. You know, we hear too often in the news all the negative stuff.
Yeah. Let's talk about how this book kind of flows, because there are different ways that you could have, created this resource, but you touch on certain topics, certain stereotypes that people have. Tell us about the thought process when you decided to sit down and write this. How did you decide how this was going to flow in the discussion portion of this?
Well, I think we had just a conversation. Again, it all came out of relationship, and I think that was, we sat down having coffee one time in a restaurant and just said, what are some of the issues that we'd like that are important to us, to me as a Native person, to Tim as a Canadian, and to just discuss these things, and that's where it really came out of a conversation.
So we had our talking points, and then we organized where we would start, where we would end up, and we would start with, when I say simpler, I mean more familiar conversations. Yeah. So we recognize that most Canadians would actually recognize a drum and some of the regalia, at least some of it, and the music. And so we start with those portions, and then we go a little bit deeper and we start talking about elders and story, and then further talk about creator and creation, and some things my peers might definitely be less familiar with. And then at the end, we really talk about stereotypes and learning and respecting. So once we had the talking points, we just organized how to make them flow.
Yeah, so you talk about clothing, you talk about the drum, you talk about music, you talk about the headdress, and just the importance of all of these elements to Indigenous culture. And I love the tie-in as a parent as well to show, okay, for a younger audience, what in your culture would you do that kind of represents it? What kind of music would you listen to in your culture? What kind of clothing would you wear in your culture to show that it's not this whole other world, but we have so many similarities as well as differences. Talk about that.
Yes, that was important to us. Similarities, yes, and to draw out things that were in the kids, so it was just be a great learning experience. But also, I think that a lot of times we're afraid of differences. Anything we're unfamiliar with, we're kind of scared of and we'll pull away from. But I think that conflict is where we learn, where we grow, and a lot of good things can happen in that. So to understand, recognize differences, and in our the making of this book, there was a lot of things came up that we would have to really talk through, and Tim is quoted in the Toronto Star as saying, if we as dear friends who care about each other had trouble walking, this not trouble, I guess, but walking through this, then how much more is Canadian society going to have? And I'm probably butchered your quote, but anyway.
There were all the right words were there. So at the opening, we have a message to teachers and parents that is from us, that says before you walk your child through this book, you need to know that this is not, we call our tender little book, our children's book, but the depth and time that had to be poured into it relationally. As someone from a United Empire Loyalist history, someone from Indigenous, like the cross sections of our histories, pretty rough.
Yeah.
And so relationally, the great respect I have for Cheryl, that she would be so gracious to enter into a book like this with me, is so significant. Hopefully the heartbeat of that shared part of our journey is written throughout the whole thing.
This leads to so many questions that I have. I want to read, this is on page 27. It says, here in North America, we are always trying to find common ground. We long for ways we can connect with one another and instantly find our mutuality. While well-intended, this is not always very honoring. We are looking for sameness, for familiarity, so we can feel comfortable. But sometimes it's good and important to step outside of our comfort zones. We have vast differences that should be acknowledged and even celebrated. As a person from an ethnic background, I see that as well. Sometimes you struggle to see the sameness and you don't get to celebrate the differences that we have. As you two had this conversation and kind of, as you said, Tim, kind of understand where the two of you are coming from, how did that how did you resolve that? Seeing the commonalities, but also celebrating those differences and being able to then impart that on the next generation to celebrate that difference.
Well, I think it was a lot of work, I think, right? It's a lot of work.
I think we were able to celebrate our sameness and celebrate our differences, right? But the book is where, for me, from my standpoint, is where I could fit in. Maybe I represent the settler people in Canada, whether they're new or historically, but the book is about honoring and respecting our Indigenous culture. So it feels like we're in a shared story, but it's coming to the grace and the graciousness and the truth and reconciliation, me absorbing the truth of what's really gone on and representing people that would, and the reconciliation that would take much grace and care from Cheryl and her people to allow me into that conversation.
Yeah, and I think when we overlook our differences and we just want to talk about sameness, I think we overlook something that's really of value, that the contribution of Indigenous people to the Canadian mentality, or I think that Canadians are known as different from Americans in different ways. We're more, polite, gracious, quiet. Those are maybe stereotypes or generalizations, but I think most people would agree that they're true. And there was a great book, Métis Nation, written where they say that it's, I'm messing this up, sorry. But anyway, there's a great book written called The Métis Nation, where they talk about how the Canadian identity has actually been shaped largely by Indigenous people. And it's a beautiful thought, because Indigenous people are very gracious and are very hospitable and in so many ways.
And there's lots of intense learning in that book, in the teacher guide and parents guide, but the focus is really in the byline or the subtitle, the front. It's celebrating the beauty of our Indigenous people and starting at that place. And for me to visit Cheryl's community in northern BC and visit her family and their clans and the beautiful people there, and to go to some of the Nate's things in Thunder Bay and the Truth and Reconciliation in Ottawa, and listen to the residential school survivors and receive the intense gravity of the story. but the great beauty and talking about elders and Creator and their children, I mean, just it's been overwhelming and so humbling for me.
Yeah. And this is also part of something, Tim, that you've journeyed into with the Compassion series as well, and getting into schools. Tell us about the Compassion series and why this is such a instrumental part of what you want to do.
Yeah, so for me, it'll work out of the network of the Compassion series where I've had other children's books. For Cheryl, it's an independent book. It's a standalone book, and it was important to us that it mentions the Compassion series in the back and in my bio, but in the front, it's not on there because it's independent. It is in and of itself our shared project. So I share it from the Compassion series side. She shares it from the Heartbeat of Who She Is side. And so we just think it's vital that we break down stereotypes and judgment and fear by approaching projects in a way that lets answer kids' questions. This book would mean nothing for me to attempt it by myself. It really is the heartbeat of Cheryl that's poured into it.
And we had, I think, a lot of discussion around, and Tim's great too, because it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to do this, and just, he was like, okay, can I, should I? And we would have this really great conversation about, even talking about the totem pole, like, right? We had, we should have a totem pole in there. Oh yeah, I said, of course we need a totem pole. Well, which one can I draw? When can I make one up? Oh, wait.
Which one is cultural appropriation? What are they allowed to draw?
Maybe we can't. Maybe we can't take one. We need permission, and we really struggled with it. I think it was quite a while before Tim finally said, "Oh, there's a really great totem pole at Stanley Park. Everybody knows it and sees it. Maybe I can draw it." And I was like, "Perfect. That's perfect." And it's well known, so that was a kind of a compromise, I guess we had to come to, but we really had to wrestle through some of these issues of what is cultural appropriation and can we do that? We need permission. We had to be very careful in everything. Every step we took, we really thought about it.
So even child-friendly artwork that I had to do. It wasn't just whipping out drawings. So there was a long conversation about what was cool and what was not cool to go with. My friend Greg Paul, who would be familiar to some of your readers and runs Sanctuary and writers, good friends to both of us. Cheryl's actually staying at Greg and Maggie's house right now. He said, "Tim, I think there's a book about writing this book."
Wow.
Because it took us 3 years to get to this place.
We only have seconds left, but I would love for you to read The Honor Drum, which I have said it was a poem, but I've been now clarified that they're stanzas, but it's kind of a thread throughout the book. You take each stanza and kind of highlight elements of it throughout the book.
Look to the people of age and of youth with a history of wisdom, of honor and truth. They come to the drum, it's the heartbeat of earth. They know of its value, assured of its worth. Theirs is the music of story and chant, songs from the heart, songs of the dance. Dances of meaning, movements of life, of wonder and family, free from all strife. Patterns and symbols and colors abound, like the blues of the sky and the greens of the ground. Powwow is a time to gather and meet, to sing and remember, to dance and to eat. Totem poles too have a story to tell of nations and chiefs and families that dwell. Important are stories to hear and to tell, history, values, and humor as well. The elders are keepers of stories and tales, respected and honored, their wisdom prevails. The words we use matter to help understand, like the word Indigenous, it means of the land. Indigenous people, each in their own way, have a name for Creator to speak and to pray. We honor Creator by caring well for all of creation, shore to shore to shore. Imagine if there were an honor drum where all children gathered, wherever they're from. To listen, respect, to learn, and to share, for this is the way to show that you care. I think it's important to say that we really argued back and forth who would read that, because I think it should have been Cheryl, but she thought my cadence and because I had my glasses was the better idea. But those are
Thank you both.
only meant to honor as I read them, not that I should be reading it. So.
Thank you both for writing this book. I think it's going to bless so many children across Canada. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Maggie.